Welcome everybody. We'd like to call the meeting to order. It's the Risk and Assurance Committee. So I'll just go through a couple of housekeeping matters firstly. But before we do, we'll go through housekeeping matters. So this meeting is being recorded and is being live streamed on the Council's YouTube channel. There are fire and emergency and health and safety procedures on the screens around the meeting, but as you will note, on hearing the alarm, leave the site immediately by the nearest exit, fire exit, and evacuate to the assembly area of the clock tower in the square. A reminder that smoking and vaping is prohibited. There's a defibrillator located outside the entrance to customer services, and report any near-miss incidents to our committee administrator, Natalia Kushnarenko. Thank you. Look, for those councillors in person, will be using the voting device. And councillors online, do we have any councillors online today? We have no councillors online. So we'll move on to, and I'd like to ask Councillor Zavalin to now formally open our meeting with a karakia. So we're in your hands, Councillor.
Ngā mihi, Mr. Chair. Me ino i tātou. Tūtaua mai I runga, tūtaua mai I raro, tūtaua mai I roto, tūtaua mai I waho. Kia tau ai te mauriti, te mauri ora, ki te katoa. Haumie, huie, tāhie. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. So we'll now move to item 2 on our agenda, apologies. We have an apology from the Mayor, and we have an apology from Councillor Mikelad, who was on council business. We have, in terms of agenda item 3, there are no additional items of business, and I'm unaware of any declarations of interest being required, so we can move forward. We will go back. My apologies. I'd like to move those apologies. Councillor Naylor will second that, and we'll put that to the vote. And those have been carried, all in favour. There is no public comment today. So that brings us to item 6 on our agenda, which is the adoption of the annual report. And I'd like to welcome Scott Manser and Debbie Pereira, our audit director, external audit director, to the table, and we're in your hands.
Good afternoon, elected members and chair. Very pleasing to be here with what's hopefully the very final draft of our annual report, ready for the committee to recommend to council for adoption for the previous financial year. There has been a lot of work from both the internal team and from Debbie's audit team to get us to this point. I think we've been on the phone 3 or 4 times this week already, just as we get to those final throws. There have been a couple of changes since the fourth quarter report that was presented to the Stratton Finance Committee in August. So we've included those in attachment 3 of your papers. A couple of audit changes there. The 23-24 year is the first year that's been completed in our new ERP system, Authority Altitude. It's been a really good year in terms of processing of financial information, and we are in a really good space with a new system, better than some councils would be through changes of system. So that's very pleasing from the financial information point of view. We do have some internal processes that do need attention. They got brought to our attention through the audit, and really pleasingly, officers have already taken steps to rectify majority, if not all, of those processes already, and we'll continue to monitor them through the current financial year. That's about it from me, but I will pass over to Debbie, our Audit Director, for any comments around the audit process and anything else before we open up for questions from the floor.
Cool. Thank you, Scott, and through the chair. So it is always pleasing to be at this end of the process. I just want to acknowledge the staff, and in particular it's been a difficult year this year because of the change in financial management systems, so moving from Ozone to Civica Authority Altitude. It's always a big effort to do, and so one of the areas of focus that we've had is to look at the systems. We're looking at the data migration from the old system to the new system, and making sure that we've got sufficient audit evidence and comfort over the numbers that are coming out of that new system. And I'm really pleased to say that we don't have any concerns around the numbers. Everything has flowed through appropriately. We have, when we do our report to council, there will be some minor areas for addressing, but management are already really well aware of the issues and have got processes in place so far. So when I look back probably over the years when councils have moved new FMIS systems, it usually doesn't go so smoothly. So I think it's a real credit to council that it has been a smooth process, and I do want to acknowledge that. I just thought I could just give you a really quick overview of some of our areas of focus, and then what the audit opinion is going to look like. I think you might have a copy of the audit plan in front of you, but this really sets out the key areas. So the first thing there is the risk of management override. So that is a risk that every entity has. It's not specific to Palmerston North City Council, but as auditors we do have to address that risk. And so we put our audit procedures to cover that, and we have no concerns to raise with you. The second thing here is the fair value of property, plant and equipment in a non-revaluation year. So council is very asset intensive. You've got a large dollar value of infrastructure sitting in your accounts. Your policy is that you hold that asset at fair value. And so therefore there's an assessment that needs to be done every year, so we're satisfied with that. The data migration, so the FMIS system and the migration of the data across, which I've just talked about. And then this year you've had a valuation of land and buildings and your investment property, so we do a lot of work around that as well, and to gain comfort around the value that you've got in there, so we have no concerns with that. The last thing that we did have in our audit plan was around the local water done well program. It's an issue for all councils. We have looked at the disclosure that you've got in your annual report, and there's nothing that we're not raising anything in our audit opinion over it, and we're comfortable with what you've got disclosed. But obviously going forward it will have a big impact on council. Now just to the audit opinions. So the final audit opinion I don't have to present to you at this minute. We have had an opinion review committee this morning, so the final wording is yet to be confirmed, but I will just run through with you what is likely to be, or what is going to be in there, but not the exact words. So in terms of the financial statements, we're comfortable. We have no issues with the numbers in the financial statements. So the opinion will be saying that it fairly presents a true and fair view of what has happened. As you'll be aware, and occurring for a number of years. We have two parts of the audit opinion, so one is over the financial and one is over the non-financial performance, and that's all the measures that you set as part of your long-term plan and annual plan. And it has quite a high focus for councils because it's probably where the public can engage a lot more than with the numbers, because it really tells the story of how council performed. We do have some historic qualifications around the complaints and the response times. Very pleased to note that there has been a change in system from April this year, which is going to be addressing those issues. We don't have it for the full year, so we still do have to make reference to that in our audit opinion, but looking forward to next year when we shouldn't have to. Another comparative issue that we had is around road smoothness. So last year there was a qualification because council hadn't had traffic counts for 2 years, and that's a big factor that goes into the number that goes into the report. Pleased to say that council has had, in fact, has had two lots of traffic count data since our report last year. So it's cleared for this year, but we do have a comparative. The third one that we've got is a new qualification this year, and that is around the processing times for resource consents. So with the migration over to authority, there has been a bit of an issue in terms of the stop-start. It's not merely a start, you receive a resource consent, you issue it so many days later. There are times where the clock stops in terms of the counting for that compliance, and so there has been some anomalies with that. So I know management are working through that and looking into rectifying that, but at this point we're unable to say whether the number that you've got reported is correct or not. I do note that the ones that we did test, we came up with a lower time than what authority was coming up with, so it does give some comfort that you're not stating a better picture than what may be the case, but we don't know for certain what that number is. So that will be a new one for this year, which may get cleared next year, depending on how that goes. But yeah, but happy to take any questions that you might have.
Councillor Hapeta.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. My question's relating to 3.7 in the paper, so that might be for you, Scott. Just want a bit more clarification around 3.7, and Debbie may have referred to it, but I just want to know if you could just answer that for me, please.
Yeah, absolutely. I was expecting this question, funnily enough. So as the new system came online, all officers had to learn the new processes. Unfortunately, what has happened is purchase orders were duplicated through not knowing quite the right process to be following and or thinking they hadn't already done so. And through one of the reconciliations that were completed at year end, we found through the audit team that there was 900,000 of duplication of purchase orders that were sitting in the system as incurred expenditure. They'd been paid on a separate purchase order and a separate invoice, so it was a pure duplication. So we had to back 900,000 out of council's financials, 700,000 out of the operating, the profit and loss, and 200,000 out of our capital. Those processes have been corrected, and we've updated training material and instructions to ensure that won't happen again. We've also implemented more checks throughout the financial year as well, as that was the other part. As we learned the new system, we didn't know what we needed to be checking throughout the year, and we sort of only realised that in the last 2 months of the financial year, and we've inbuilt that check monthly to ensure that doesn't happen in the current financial year.
So just as a follow-up, was it a process or a system failure?
Process.
Yeah, it sounded more like process rather than system. So in terms of following that up, it is more training for the process rather than the system?
Correct. Training for process and then checking by my team as well.
Okay. Thank you, Mr Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Harpeta. Councillor Johnson.
Thanks, Mr Chair. I've just got one question around numbers on page 97 of the separate attachment, the full report, sorry. So under expenses, we've got support to community groups, 2.496 million. So we had a comment this morning in the meeting that support to community groups was 5.5 million, I think. So has there been a massive increase between last year to this year?
Through the LTP process, you'll recall our overhead allocation model popped up a couple of times. That is the predominant change from the year that's just completed to the new financial year. And in fact, I've actually got to go away and hunt my emails for the answer to that question that I think was asked in May this year. So I'll do that when I've finished down here.
Well, I am concerned that the wrong figure is being promulgated as the amount of support that we're giving to community groups. So if that could be clarified and shared with the council, I think that would be very helpful.
Absolutely. We'll go and hunt for that answer for you.
Through Mr Chair, I do have that answer. Well, I have the answer that was provided back at the time that question was asked, because it was asked during the long-term plan process. And what I can say is the change from the year that's just been audited to the long-term plan year one, there was a significant shift in overhead allocation. If you recall, we did revisit the methodology of overheads for all activities in the long-term plan. And there was also a revenue reduction from the previous year due to some one-off Better Off funding for an investigation into a multicultural hub investigation. So that was a one-off externally funded piece of work of 500,000, and we also included, I believe there was some work in year one of the LTP around a homelessness pilot and program. So I think that was around about the 200,000 mark. So that's the bulk of the changes that have occurred.
Thank you. So is it correct to say that we spend 5.5 million on support to community groups this year compared to 2.5 million, to round it up, last year, and that therefore there's been an increase of 3 million a year in support to community groups, or is that not fair?
It's in terms of council having a way of showing its full costs through how it funds its activities. It is fair to say that group's share now is 5 odd million, but it is also fair to say that is made up of a combination of direct costs of the service and indirect overhead costs. So it's now incurring a much larger share of overhead costs in the long-term plan to what it was previously.
And so the figure in the annual report for this year that we're looking at now, is that just the direct cost, or does that include some overhead?
That's both. That's both direct and indirect costs, in line with the overhead allocation from the previous long-term plan. So we use an overhead model that stays fairly consistent over an LTP period. The new financial year has a new overhead allocation model that officers and the senior lead team reviewed and agreed as part of that process.
Okay. I'm keen to get this clear because figures are being used in the chamber to indicate that we've massively increased our support to community groups, and I want to be clear whether that's correct or not. So are you able to compare the direct costs from this report to the direct costs in the current year?
we would be able to. I would just have to take that offline to break down the total cost into direct and indirect costs.
Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Wood.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Just on that vein, I agree with Councillor Johnson. It's very hard comparing apple with orange figures. It makes it unconducive to good discussion. So is it also possible to retroactively apply the new overhead model we're using for this current financial year to the last financial year just for that particular figure? Because I think it would also give us, yes, direct cost, but also what's the total cost of the service change between the 2 years?
I'll have an attempt at that. No, that would be incredibly difficult to do.
That's fine if it's, yeah. Anyway, that wasn't actually my question. So I wanted to ask on page 47 regarding attachment 3, and this could just be me being quite dense, but it says remuneration for employees and elected members has decreased by $6.5 million as a correction to separate capitalised remuneration from other expenses. So in my mind, that was, we had it in our general remuneration pile and now we've capitalised $6.5 million of it. The next note down under other expenses says that it's a $6.5 million increase due to capitalised remuneration moving to remuneration expense, implying that we're taking capitalised and putting it into non-capitalised. So which is true, or am I just reading that wrong?
That is a very good question. I'll try and explain it, and funnily enough, this is our overheads popping up yet again. Our capitalised remuneration through the previous long-term plan was all recorded through our other expenditure line items. As we were developing up the long-term plan, we came to realise that that probably wasn't the best accounting treatment. So when you capitalise a role, there is a portion of that capital expenditure that is salary of that staff member, and then there is a portion that is the overheads to support that staff member. What we've done through this adjustment of 6.5 million is recode the salaries and wages portion of those costs from other expenses into remuneration and reducing the reported remuneration on the profit and loss, and we have increased our other expenditure to more fairly reflect those costs there. Hopefully that's an easily understand sort of answer, and I'm feeling like you might have another follow-up, so I'll leave it.
I think that makes sense. And so my only other follow-up was, so I take it we haven't overrated our community by $6.5 million, given it's just a reallocation.
That's a reporting disclosure change.
Excellent. And my final question probably isn't one that you can answer, but if we, in the less financial measures around our key achievements for the year, if we wanted to see any of those changed, if we thought they perhaps didn't reflect council's key achievements, I know we have this conversation every year, is that just best left for comment and see where we get to?
It depends, and it depends because if we quote figures, then Debbie and her team have to check to make sure they're not in contrast to any other figures and that sort of stuff. So if you do have any wording changes, we'd probably need to know fairly rapidly following the conclusion of this meeting, just so that we can run the words past Debbie and her team, just to ensure that we're not contradicting or changing or anything like that.
Well, okay, so for example, if under the creative and exciting city key achievements, a new fully electric public transport system was one of them, and I made the comment that I thought perhaps highlighting that we had 260,000 visits to our cultural CCOs might be a more appropriate achievement reflecting our creative and exciting goal, would that be best to come through comment or as a recommendation, or?
That could be dealt with under our minor edits and proofing. We would probably just need a version of what you'd like to say that we can get Liv and her team to check, and then we just run them past Debbie and the audit team.
Thank you. I'll leave comments because not all councillors might agree with me. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I've got a number of questions, if that's okay. But firstly, just to the issue around the community support comments this morning, I just think it's worth noting that those numbers came from page 89 of the long-term plan. So they were correct out of there, and I recognise there was some transfer, but just if people are thinking they're not correct, that's where you can find that information. But in terms of the questions around this document, the looking at the full attachment of the big document on page 15, there's some four high-level pieces of information there. Oh, it's actually page 11 of the document, but 15 of our. So those, when this document came to the agenda meeting, there was some four bubbles, and that was described a bit more visually, a bit more easier to understand, and that page hasn't been included, and I'm just wondering why that's been pulled. I think it was immediately prior to that page originally.
Through you, Mr. Chair, in terms of those boxes, it was felt that they were reflecting the exact same comment that was on the page that you see on page, and I haven't got the page number in front of me, in the table on page 11, and felt that it wasn't necessarily in line with the presentation style of the rest of the document. So we decided that would be best not to have just those four boxes.
And so if we wanted to pull something like that back in for having it clearer, can we do that?
You could consider that.
And is that a minor change, or how are we dealing with any changes to the document from now to the 30th of October when it comes to council?
I would suggest that would be So the chief executive will be able to make minor edits to bring back for adoption. My suggestion, though, if you're wanting to add things in, sometimes it's just easier to capture things that like that particular instance because it's adding something in, and we'd have to look at it in terms of the auditor that it ties. That's all.
So if it's the same information but it's presented differently, would the auditor have to look at that?
If it has financial information in it, the auditor will just want to make sure that it all ties, yes.
Okay. Just looking at the fourth bullet point down there, increase in net debt. Actual net debt increased by 47.7 million, higher than budget of 36.1. If we wanted to see where our debt is at the year end, where would we find that? I did find it on page 212 under 25, but just couldn't see it clearly described anywhere else. But I may have missed it.
So it is also on our statement of financial position on page 167 or 171 of the separately attached document as well, under borrowings, which will tie to that page and note you've just referenced.
161, did you say?
167.
Oh, yeah. Of the document, 2, 3.
Yep. Current liabilities, borrowings of 25 million, non-current liabilities of borrowings of 250 million and 5,000.
Apologies, I'm just trying to see where it is on that page. Liabilities. Borrowings 25 million, did you say?
As current liabilities, and then in the non-current liabilities are 5 lines lower, 250 million.
251 million, that current total non-current liabilities?
Come one row above, borrowings 250,005.
250,005. Oh, so
Yep.
Is that the net?
That's total debt, and then if you add the 25 million from a bit further above, you get the 275 million, which is our total debt.
Okay. So that's page 171. Thank you. So is something like that relevant to highlight? I couldn't see that also anywhere described in the 32-page summary document, or have I missed it there too? Is that a relevant piece of information given our community's interest in debt and how much it might be growing, that we could maybe highlight more earlier on in the document where people could find it easier?
It certainly could. I would just caution that highlighting one figure, and particularly that of debt, can be sometimes misleading depending on how particular programs are funded. The status of growth programs, for example, are funded from debt up front and then recovered through development contributions. Debt is almost the bottom of everything, so it just needs to have some caution if we highlight solely a debt figure, but it certainly could be done if that was the desire of the committee.
Okay, thank you. So just moving to page 57 of the agenda. Sorry, going back and forth a bit here.
Sorry, while you're doing that, just another place where it also features is on page 19. There's an equity and debt of the city graph as well, which shows the trend of debt over the last and equity over the last 5 years.
Yeah, I saw that, but it doesn't. You can't tell how much it is because it's just a bar. It's pretty. Anyone's guess how much that's grown. Does it say? Or does it say?
It has the legend to the left-hand side, but take the point that perhaps we could see if there's a way of making this a bit more readable, but
Yeah, that would.
we'll have to take that offline.
Okay, thank you.
But there is a graph that exists that shows it.
Okay, thank you. So page 57. In terms of the information around materiality, the halfway down that page, it's page 8 of one of the reports, but it's page 57 of our agenda. It's under materiality, and I guess I'm trying to understand where materiality is relevant to what we include and don't include. In performing our audit, we apply materiality, and it talks about materiality referring to information that, if omitted, misstated, or obscured, could be reasonably be expected to influence readers' overall understanding of the financial statements. I'm just wondering, who is our audience for both of these documents, the full one and the summary one?
The public.
Yeah. And so, okay, thank you. In terms of, do we have a view about what we believe the public is interested in terms of what we include in here?
I might defer this one to Debbie, but they do operate under guidance set out by the Office of the Auditor General mostly, but I'll let Debbie expand on that.
Sure, thank you. So yeah, our materiality is based on, it was set out here, but it's based on the expenditure that you spend. And the reason we use expenditure as a basis is because you're a service organisation, you're delivering a service to the public. The revenue is the outcome, is the rates is effectively the balancing figure. So the expenses are the cost that it takes to do deliver what you've got. So therefore we use that as a basis. So it's our materiality. We look at it from the user's perspective. We also set materiality around the non-financial, which is a couple of pages over, so which is a little bit different than the numbers, but yeah.
Okay, thank you. I'll move on. Page 34 of our agenda. The financial summary, which is actually page 24 of the summary document. One of the lines on there, finance costs, actual for 2023, 5 million, and then our budget was 9.8, and then it's got actual 14.4 million for finance costs. And the description down the bottom of that page says higher than budget due to unbudgeted non-cash valuation on derivative financial instruments. I'm just wondering if, I don't fully understand what that means. Does that capture is there a way of describing that better describes why our finance costs are nearly half as much again as what we budgeted.
I might,
I'll have a first crack at that. It's it is a very technical treatment. So effectively, what that is, every year the swaps that council holds in terms of swapping floating rate loans for fixed rates gets revalued. In years where the prevailing interest rate is increasing, or if the general trend is increasing, they tend to increase in value and so reduce the amount of expense. We're at a point in time over the life of the swaps, there may be lower rates starting to come through in the financial markets. Then they start to be revalued downwards, so they become less valuable, and so we must show the reduction in I guess the asset value of those swaps as an expense against finance costs.
Okay, thank you. So in terms of the fact that we drew down 32% more debt than what our budget was, so we drew down 47.7 million rather than 36.1 million, was the additional debt that we drew down an impact on our higher finance costs?
I might take the first stab at that. I just would like to clarify that in that 14.4 million, there is 2.6 million of valuation change on those financial derivative instruments. So our interest expense for the year was 11.8 million, not 14.4. It's just under the accounting standards, we have to group those two expenditure items together. You can see that as part of note 3 on page 181 of the full annual report, where it breaks down those costs.
Yep. Thank you. That's helpful. But the fact that if it was still over the 12, was still over the 9.8, does the additional debt that we've drawn down contribute to our higher finance costs there? And if so, should we be mentioning that as well as the other swaps thing?
I'll take a stab at that first. You would also have to look at the finance revenue that's above it, for which we borrow in advance of loans coming up to mature, and we put them on term deposit. So you would actually have to take that into consideration. I'd say we came pretty close to the budget in terms of genuine interest expense for the year.
Okay. I do have a few more, Mr. Chair. You're okay with that? Sorry, I'm not sure if my colleague is saying something down the line here. So my next question is to do with note 14 on page 197. Of the big document. Sorry, I need to find it. So the description of the arrears, this is to do with the P&AL lending, borrowings, and at the bottom paragraph on the left-hand side, talks about that interest is payable semi-annually in arrears. 8 million was outstanding at 30th of June 2024. So the interest being outstanding by 8 million, is that costing council anything extra, the fact that it's the payments are delayed?
So it wasn't 8 million of interest that was outstanding. That is 8 million of loans we have paid to the airport company.
Oh, okay.
So it's in the fair value wording of that note. So what it's saying is interest is paid semi-annually, so i.e. every 6 months. 8 million of money has been passed through to the airport company as a loan.
Okay. Okay, and just in terms of the other question around the airport is on page 33 of the agenda. It, so 33 of the, yeah, or 31 of our agenda. So the airport update on the top right-hand side of that page, it talks about by arrangement with council that there were, by arrangement with the council, no dividend was paid in relation to the 2023 year, the same as in the previous 3 years. And I'm just wondering if there's a reason for there being given, what the reason is for no dividend. Was that to do with the terminal redevelopment, needing the money for the terminal redevelopment?
I believe that's correct, yes.
Okay. I think that's all from me. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, councillor. Councillor Barrett.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And thank you, Scott and Debbie. Could we just rename it the annual debt report? That's rhetorical. We'll leave that one. Wanted to follow up around Councillor Wood's line of questioning. Can you just help us understand why elected members are excluded from the drafting process of the annual report, especially around key achievements?
I might look to Cam to help me with that one. It's largely how we've done, but I guess in terms of the narrative parts of the document, there could be absolutely some input from elected members. I'm just not quite sure how that would work in terms of a process of when this information goes to audit. So this has been with audit. I think it was given at the end of August. So any feeding into that would have to be done sort of in that August month after the final quarter report is brought to you mid-August. So you'd probably have about 5 days to feed into it.
Thanks. So I'm hearing that it is possible if we expressed a desire.
Through the chair, absolutely, councillor. I'll take your points on note, and we'll look to see what might come out of commentary.
Great, thanks. So just indicate to the chair I'm likely to bring a recommendation to test that would give some direction around that. Just wanted to follow up around Councillor Hopper's questions too, just around 3.7. So just in the report, just to double check. So did anybody actually get paid twice, or was it just that we thought it was a mix up internally?
No one got paid twice. So
Was
these were all open purchase orders that were recorded as expenditure, therefore overstating our expenditure for the year by 700,000.
Great. So was anybody ever even close to being paid twice?
No.
Thanks. Questions around KPIs 3.4 in the report. There's a number of KPIs where the outcomes were changed. I just wondered how we got in that situation.
We report the results and collect information as the year goes, and we bring back through the quarterly report. At the end of the year, we provide those data sets to the audit team. They can test some things. They have advice from Office Auditor General about certain issues, and they check to make sure that we are fairly reporting some of those things. And in the case of those 5 measures, 4 of them were switched from target met to target not met because we weren't quite meeting the criteria correctly, and 1 was switched to target not measured because we didn't run a survey.
Great, thanks. Thanks for that run through. I guess, is there a tendency to over-marking ourselves on KPIs?
I'm probably not in the best position to answer that question, but I might pass that to Wayne.
Through the chair, no, the intention is never to overmark ourselves, is to provide the accurate detail.
Great, thank you. On the flip side of that, I was noticing around the KPIs for some of the CCOs especially, they were either getting a did not achieve or an achieve. And on the numbers, there was a number of examples where the achievement was well and truly exceeded. And I just wondered, is exceed an option there, or is there a reason that we lock people out?
Don't believe exceeds an option. it's either met or not met.
Right, okay. We'll take that as how we do accounting. Couple other areas of questions, one around disclosure. So there's the disclosure section, page kind of 232 onwards there. And just a couple that caught my eye there. So the debt control benchmark, that was the first time in 10 years that we had missed that. And I just wanted to understand how we found ourselves in that situation.
There's a few things at play here. My earlier comment around debt being one of them. As we brought the new system on, we were all hands to the pump at getting some certain features working. It did take us a while to start following up some accounts receivable items that were starting to get longer than 90 days. We brought that back closer to how it should be in the last quarter of the year. But as a result, we did have some greater outstanding debt at 30 June. And where we have outstanding bills payable to us, the default, unfortunately, is that debt is used to ensure that we have enough operating cash flows to pay our staff and pay our suppliers on a monthly basis.
Thanks, that's helpful. The other one was around the operations control benchmark. We've now missed that 2 years in a row. Is that kind of what are we doing to respond, I guess, when we start missing things multiple years in a row?
That one's a little tricky. So this is where some revaluations of our assets can really impact the result of this. We could seek to recover some more revenue from our infrastructure network, which basically means we increase the targeted rates or increase the rates to cover operational expenditure more fully from that. This is only looking at our infrastructure network as a subset of council, so that'd be quite that it's a subset of council that's considered in this operations control benchmark. The wider council portfolio is how we obviously set the rates and things like that, but this is just a small subset for our infrastructure network.
Great, thank you. And finally, with the chair's allowance, the graphs in both the summary and the full document indicate that elected members' remuneration is 1% of expenditure, which, if I've done the calculation, is 1.84 million, but the actual amount of remuneration is 1 million. And I just wanted to understand that overstatement and the potential implications in the public of them doing some quite simple math and coming up with the idea that we're remunerated 1.84 rather than 1.0.
Do you have a particular page you're in a number against?
Page 17 of, I think, the full report. Or page 35 of attachment 2.
Sorry, I'm not following.
Okay,
those
no,
pages.
sorry. So on that page, there's it's 35 of the agenda paper, and it's 25. It looks like of the way that it's paginated in the summary report. It's got that kind of pie chart looking thing of types of expenses incurred. It's got a 1% by elected members. And when I went and looked up in the table, the total expenditure of council was 184 million. So that led me to believe that this graph is suggesting that our remuneration as elected members is 1.8 million. Elsewhere in the report, it indicates our remuneration is actually 1.0 million. And I just wondered why we're kind of over-indicating in a visual.
I'll have to take that one offline and check that and make sure we've got that correctly reported for you.
I can probably explain why it's displayed the way it's displayed. So the reason, now that I've come to those graphs, the reason why you're seeing that is because, simply put, that graph is rounded to the nearest whole instead of to a decimal point position, is the explanation as to why that's showing as 1%.
Would that be just a minor correction to actually get the decimal into that?
Check. We can check with our auditor on that one. I'm not sure whether that would or wouldn't be, whether they would have to just check further calculations. I'm not sure.
If we did 1 decimal place for that particular percentage, we'd have to do that right the way through all the documents, and would have to work with the graphic design team to make that happen. It's quite a low level of precision to go to 1 decimal place. I know where the question is coming from, and I absolutely understand that, but 1 decimal place on percentages right the way through can be quite a level of detail.
Thanks for those answers, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Johnson.
Yeah, so actually, on the same graph and the one above it, I'm just wondering why we've got percentages on there and not the actual figures.
We could switch that.
Yeah, or you know, have
both.
or both. Yeah. Is that a minor change?
Yep, we can have a look at making that happen.
Okay, and then I presume those graphs refer back to the table on the page before, do they? Is that the figures that they're generated from?
Yes.
So how would you identify borrowing for capital? Is that under capital revenue? Or where is that?
No, it's not under capital revenue. Capital revenue is external funding for capital projects that we've received. It would be a subset of the borrowing line, which is escaping my vision right this second. It will be generated off a more detailed document.
So is it under other expenses?
No, it'll be off. It'll be off one of the fizzes in the detailed document, which is near the back and page 232 of the wider document, where we disclose what our sources of capital funding are.
Okay, so looking at that second pie chart or whatever it is, where it talks about types of expenses incurred, where are the capital expenses on that?
That's a summary of our operating expenditure, not our capital expenditure.
So would it be possible to put a better title on that then, so that it's clear what that refers to?
Yep, we can do that.
Because to my read of it, you've got financial summary, and then you've got, you know, the table of figures, and then you've got 2 pie charts. One is sources of revenue and one's types of expenses incurred. It's not clear that one is, that's just operating expenses. If you were looking for how much had been spent on capital or whatever, you wouldn't see it there, would you?
Through Mr. Chair, we can put the word operating expenses in as the titling of it.
Okay.
So it's clear that it's operating.
All right. Okay, thank you. And just my last question was just around how you will deal with requests that one or another thing in the report might be emphasised more. So do those need to come now as a recommendation that we all vote on? Or is it one of those things that someone could just send an email after the fact and then get a particular figure highlighted in bold, as it were?
It probably is easier if you're looking for particular changes. My view is it's easier to have them noted so that we get the consensus that that's what we want.
Oh, I'm not looking for any change, Cam.
Yeah,
Just
but,
trying to establish what the process is
yeah.
if someone were looking for change.
I mean, if it's something something really quite minor, using inserting a word like operating expenses to further clarify expenses, it's probably just a explanation. But if it's a change of things, it's just easier to have it recorded and voted on, so we get the sense that that's what everyone wants.
Thank you.
Thank you, councillor. I did have a question for you, Debbie. The Mayor is going to be asked to sign a representation letter next week on behalf of elected members. Could you just outline what are the major representations, and if there are any matters that have arisen during the audit that have been rectified, could you perhaps just provide a bit of colour to the committee on those matters, and if there have been any changes in the representation between this year and last year?
Yep. Sure, happy to do that. Yeah, so there's no changes in the representation from this year and last year. And from memory, we don't have any unadjusted audit differences. I think everything has been changed. So that's usually something that we would have in the back. And it is a standard letter of representation. It's really having council represent to me that you've provided me with all the information, that there's nothing that has changed. It covers subsequent events, provision of information, etc. So it is a very standard representation letter. So there's nothing to highlight to you. The only thing is we may, in line with previous year, we will note in there that because it's a modified opinion over the non-financial, that it may get reported up into an Auditor General's report. They usually summarise disclosures around different qualifications. So but that would have been in the previous one, so it's no change.
Thank you for that. And then just reflecting on the discussion and actually some of the comments from councillors around timing and opportunity for engagement, would you just like to perhaps outline how and what the opportunities are to improve this process, shorten this process, achieve a better, more efficient outcome, and have the opportunity to contribute more, understand more earlier in the process?
Yeah, sure. So one of the things that you might want to do is to present the report to this committee before it comes to us as auditors, and then that would give opportunity for council members to disclose things as they wish, and we will then see the document that that has a consensus from everyone in it. So that would be one way of probably then avoiding, when we're really close to the end, being able to make the changes that you would like to see. So that's one part. And then another part that we are looking at, and we will have discussion with management about, is how we can make the process quicker. So, I mean, we're here at the end of October, which is your statutory deadline. It's been this way for the last few years with COVID years and a long-term plan year. Under normal years, which is probably about 5 years ago now, 2019 was probably the last time, for a lot of councils. And if I look across the country, I think almost most councils are adopting next week. Those that have got a statutory deadline of 31 October, some do have an extension because of when they've adopted the LTP of 31 December. But we're keeping a running total of when everyone is adopting, and there's a lot of councils adopting at the end next week. So one of the things that we as an organisation are looking at doing, and that's engaging with yourselves as well, is to bring a lot of that work forward so that there is an opportunity for councils to adopt earlier, not all in the last week, all at the same time. So that will include, it will mean things such as valuations, and you're up for infrastructure revaluation next year, I think, for 3 Waters. So that doesn't necessarily have to be done 30th of June, and then, you know, we audit it at that time. We could do it at an earlier point in time. So that's some discussions that we can have.
Excellent, thank you. And then my last question, I was very interested in the area of audit focus around local water done well. And I just wondered, could you perhaps comment on the approach you took around whether our disclosures reflect the significance? What were the factors that you consider? How did you approach that in this audit process?
Sure. So we've been keeping up to date with the changes in legislation as they occur. So it's been quite a moving target over this last year. I mean, it was an issue last year, and there was disclosures in your report. We had an emphasis of matter last year around those disclosures, just because it was going to have such a big change on what the council might look like. With the changes this year, we've kept abreast of what has been happening with legislative changes. Then we've also looked at what impact does this have on your annual report this year, and for all councils we're looking at it. So we have made sure that council has a good explanation around the local waters done well and the changing legislation. But because it's just too early, decisions haven't been made yet as to whether you go down a water services CCO model or exactly how it's going to happen. It's too early to say. So the disclosure that you've got in your accounts, we're happy with, and we aren't emphasising that in our audit opinion this year for any council. Yeah.
Okay, thank you very much. So the waiting list for questions is now empty. We have a recommendation to the committee that the council note the 2023-24 financial reporting and draft auditor's opinion of council's 2023-24 annual report, and a recommendation to council that the council adopt the annual report and the summary annual report, and that council note that assuming audit clearance is given, the final auditor's opinion from Audit New Zealand will be received following expected adoption by the council on 30th of October 2024, and council signing off the reports. I'm happy to move that. Thank you. Thank you, Councillor. So,
Mr. Chair, we've got two additional recommendations off the floor. And
okay.
When they speak to these items, they will raise them
Okay.
and we'll take them separately.
All right. So,
These ones first.
okay. So look, I'm informed that there are two separate recommendations from the floor, but we will speak to this recommendation and deal with those recommendations when the individual councillors speak to that. Is that the way we'll handle it?
So they'll raise it when they speak,
So they'll raise it when you speak.
and then we'll deal with what's on the table first, and then we'll deal
Yes.
with after.
Okay. So we'll throw that now open to comment. So Councillor Barrett.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and just jumped in the queue early to at least get one of the additional recommendations up and visible to folks. Just in general terms, really do appreciate the incredible amount of hard work that goes into pulling together a report like this and auditing it. Particularly interested in, as you all picked up in my line of questioning, around some of the non-financial measures and how that sits with the community KPIs and how we're reporting them. And I would say that, in a world where myths and misinformation tend to just go viral quite quickly, I am less than comfortable by overstating our remuneration by nearly double. I think that that's a bit of a risk that, we're making for ourselves unnecessarily due to graphic design, et cetera, requirements. So I'd hope in future years we find a way of reflecting the true value and the accurate value in the graphs when we're actually pulling through numbers. But overall, pleased with that report and recognize the work gone into it. The additional recommendation is in my name, seconded by Councillor Wood, and may be coming to a screen near you soon, but it is simply about ensuring that the additional commentary around key achievements, that we have the chance as elected members to engage in that process, and well acknowledge and appreciate the Chief Executive's goodwill towards this. It has been a bit of a pain point over a few cycles now, and I thought this might be a bit of belts and braces approach to just make sure it is formally on our radar as we move into the future. I think that this language is reasonably open. It just talks about engaging with elected members, so that could take the form of a draft report, it could take the form of a workshop, it could take the form of a survey, it could just anything is better than getting it now when it's almost impossible to kind of meaningfully work through the range of opportunities there. So I'd ask for colleagues' support in this so that when the next report rolls around, we have an opportunity. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Wood. And look, we're debating recommendations 1 to 3. We'll return to recommendation 4 in due course, just as a reminder. Thank you, Councillor.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So shall I speak on that now or later? Thank you.
And anything else you want to raise?
Well, I'll just capture it all in one catch-all speech rather than wasting everybody's time coming back in. So I'm fully in support of Councillor Barrett's recommendation as an apology for what I'm about to do, which is putting up a recommendation to change some of the key achievements, because that seems like an utterly pedantic waste of our time. But we're doing it that way today because that's the advice we've been given on how to do it. But I think going forward, it would be much better that we just have a touch point with elected members, come to a consensus on what we think our key achievements are for the year, and if there is 1 or 2 that are particularly controversial, then bring it to the chamber. But it does seem silly to be now making minor amendments to the report via resolution to committee. So anyway, the recommendation I have is to make some minor amendments to the report by recommendation to the committee, which is 1, on goal 1, to remove mention of Featherston Street as a key achievement for the city. I know elected members have just had exorbitant amount of abuse over this over the last year, and it seems unnecessarily antagonistic to highlight that as one of our key achievements. I just think we invite ourselves for one person to read it and suddenly it'll be all over the internet that the council thinks one of their key achievements Featherston and yada yada. I just don't think it's worth picking a fight on it. So my recommendation is we remove that. Regarding goal 2, I've recommended that we substitute the bus fleet launch, which is an achievement of another council under creative and exciting city, with our CCO figures. We've had 263,000 people visit between the region, the globe and Tuamanawa. That seems like a way better achievement for what our council does to support a creative and exciting community than Horizons launching a bus network. And if we were to include Horizons launching a bus network, I would suggest that it should be under our goal around being an environmentally friendly city, not necessarily around creative and exciting. I'm not saying that there's no synergy, but I am saying if it's our council's key achievements, why we would include the key achievements of another council is beyond me. And then the third part of that recommendation is that we substitute under the Connected and Safe community. There's an achievement there which says that we're getting close to signing a health contract as one of our key achievements for the year. I just don't see that again as one of the key things our city has delivered in terms of being a connected and safe community. And so instead of that, substituting it with the completion of Papaweya Place, which also aligns with the point above around the completion of the animal shelter. So I hope these aren't particularly controversial. It just seems like we're, with the first one, inviting trouble, and with the second two, not highlighting the really important things that we did as a council. So I hope when we get to that you can support it, but also the reason I've separated into A, B and C is if we need to take it one bit separately, then I'm happy for that to be done so. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Naylor.
Oh, thank you, Mr. Chair. Yep. Just quickly to those four recommendations 4 and 5, I'm actually really happy to support those. I think that makes a lot of good sense. And I do think engagement with elected members on content and is really important. And I think it's important to note that as elected members, we're the ones that are elected to be in touch with understanding what's important to the community and represent that. So I think that sometimes is quite relevant in identifying what is more important or what is less important to include in the content. I'd also really like to thank the staff and Debbie for the huge amount of work in putting this together. And you know, the accuracy of the numbers is not something that I dispute at all. I've got good confidence in the accuracy of the information that's in this report. What does concern me though is the choice of messaging in terms of who we understand as our audience. And given the huge amount of feedback that we've had from our community about the burden of rates increases, the burden of debt, etc., I think we need to be mindful that we present information in an annual report in such a way that that information that we know is important to them is really clear, and that we don't have to read 171 pages of fine print to find it, or 232 pages of fine print to find actually what our current debt is actually very important to our community. It's actually quite important to me too, and I really struggled with the fact that I had to read that many pages before I could actually see clearly what that was. So I won't be supporting recommendation 2 at the moment, really just because particularly the summary annual report, I don't think is targeted to the audience that we're writing it for. If we're going to do a summary of this, we need to be telling them some of those particularly that key financial information that is really important. I want to just point out one graph that is on page 19 or 15 of the attachment of the large report, which I think is really interesting and relevant to the issues that our community have identified. And that's at the bottom of that page, where it shows that we've had an increase of 23.6% of net debt per rateable property. This is the sort of thing that we're hearing from our community. I'm glad that that chart is there. It's something for us to monitor. It certainly has increased significantly in recent years. Going up 23.6% in 1 year, I think, is really significant. And that's something that we need to be mindful of in terms of considering the affordability for our ratepayers. So I won't propose any changes at this point. I think Councillor Barrett's suggestion to have earlier engagement is probably a better way forward. But I do think in reading the summary document, it seems like more of a glossy promotional brochure rather than actually an accountability document to how we've delivered and performed against our annual budget and our annual plan. It does concern me that this is, we're making... this is the first year that I've ever known that we've drawn down more debt than we even budgeted for. And I thought that what we budgeted for was a huge amount of debt. What we're doing in terms of increasing our debt creates more of a problem for the decisions that we've got to make going forward in terms of water, etc., because we're using up our headroom faster than what we even planned for. So I'll leave it there, but it certainly doesn't sit well with me. The performance in many areas has been great. It doesn't sit well with me that this is the first time that we haven't met that debt control benchmark. We haven't met that operations control benchmark. Those are all really important. When to me, it's important that we live within our budget, that we live within our means. And I guess what I'm seeing here is in the last year is not ticking those boxes for me.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Johnson.
Well, in contrast to the last speaker, I was keen to congratulate staff on the excellent effort that they'd made to deal with the change in financial system and to still manage to produce, an accurate and effective annual report. And I think we shouldn't underestimate the amount of effort that's gone in to do that. And I think Debbie in her comments mentioned that she thought it had gone particularly well. So I think that deserves commendation. And also, I'm reassured by the fact that a couple of errors were picked up, which says to me that the system's working in terms of auditing and picking up things that are not right. So I thought that was a very positive aspect of the annual report that I'm very happy with. Secondly, I will just sound a note of caution around elected members' spin on the annual report being allowed to have undue influence. So the annual report has to meet a certain set of criteria. And whilst I'm happy that elected members be consulted about what they consider the key achievements to be and so on, and in previous years, I myself have moved amendments to change some of the key achievements that were listed. I do think we need to be careful. It's not a political document. If you have a particular desire to highlight certain aspects of the financial performance that you're unhappy with, I don't think that should take precedence over the document as a whole, quite honestly. I didn't raise a problem with this when it came to the consultation document for the annual budget. And afterwards, I discovered that the way that some of the spending had been framed up was quite influential on the types of submissions that we got. So now I've made a point, in my own mind at least, that when this type of influence is trying to be exerted on a council document, that I will speak up. We all have different opinions as to whether or not we should be debt funding, for example, water infrastructure, whether we should be debt funding other things or not. I'm perfectly happy with the way that things are going. So I wouldn't like the influence of some elected members to be able to have a big influence on the document as a whole. And so I think it's very important that if changes are proposed, that they're voted on, rather than they go through the back door of a minor amendment and then subsequently we find that that's influenced public opinion. And my final point would be that there's been a lot of commentary about what our community wants. Some people in the community want some things, but other people submitted and were perfectly happy, and in fact encourage us to do things differently in terms of spending and not to make cuts and restrict things. So I do take issue with those characterising that our community wants this, our community wants that. I acknowledge some sections of the community want us to spend less. Some sections of the community are struggling with their rates. Other sections of the community are not and wish us to spend more. So I don't agree with some of the commentary that's been put around this, and I certainly am concerned about a political influence being brought to bear on the annual report. So I'll just leave it there. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Harpeta.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I just completely want to support some of the words of Councillor Johnson has just said, that I want to congratulate the finance team for the work that has been done on this. I think changing the finance system and doing this work has been absolutely commendable to the team, and I think doing it with, it's not just the system, it's the processes as well, and I think it's been a very, very good job. So well done to the finance team and well done to you all to get it done in this time frame. I think Debbie brought up a good point when she said that a KPI that's going to be brought up next time is going to be around the consents, and I think that's something we're going to have to look out for, because we do all want a good KPI for our consents next time round. We have to watch that as a target going forward. So I think audits are audits, and they're always going to be tricky, and there are always going to be words in it that we're not going to like. I think Councillor Johnson hit the nail on the head. None of us are going to like some of the words that are in this, but we have to live with it. It is our audit document, it's our benchmark for going forward, and we have to be sensible. And that's what this is being about, is being a sensible document going forward. So I fully support this going forward, and so I agree with Councillor Johnson. We aren't all going to like everything, but we have to live with it. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. I'd just like to reiterate what a huge exercise this is and how well it's been done, and in particular in relation to the auditor's comments around the FMIS implementation. If I think back over the last few years, that's an implementation which was compromised in terms of timing with COVID. As an organisation, there have been enormous changes to the management team and the way this council is organised, and to deliver an outcome which is clearly fit for purpose is a tremendous achievement. So you should be very proud of that as a management team, and very, very well done. I would like to challenge the management team and the audit team going forward to really think about how collectively you can work smarter to achieve a better outcome, And by better, I have in mind the quality of outcome and the level of engagement that you get from elected members around this report, which is a really important reporting document for the public, but also just being more efficient generally. And I note that the group audit costs for this current year are over $500,000, and I would like to encourage you to think about how we can get more done with less and be more effective. But my observation is, and I'm really very pleased to see that there's a good open working relationship and that there are no unadjusted differences, and I think that is a real achievement. I think in terms of minor changes in the document, there are some general themes that I noted as I worked through the document, and I accept there's been an enormous amount of work go into this document, but I note that there are a number of summary financial reports. It's not clear to the reader whether that is related to council or group, and I think that if we just did a slight cleanse to make sure that numbers and tables that we're looking at, if they refer to the group, that's great, should be noted, but if it's directly to council as parent, then I think we should clarify that. I noticed that there are, in some of the written summaries, a number of personal pronouns. I think we and we've are probably the most frequently used word in some of those reports, and I just encourage you to have a look and have a think about how that might be expressed. I think in terms of the bar graphs, there's an opportunity, I think, to present the information graphically better with more context by thinking about whether a pie chart or a bar graph or some other form of graphical representation is better. So I'd challenge you going forward to have a think about that. And the last thing which I noted, which I think is important to me, is in the almost 300 pages of annual report, health and safety and keeping our people safe didn't get a mention, and I think that's a challenge to think about and ask ourselves just front and centre. That's got to be one of our most important priorities around governance and driving forward as a council. So that's something I think to think about for the future. But look, it's a huge exercise and really, really well done. So thank you. With no further comment, I think we could move to the first 3 recommendations and deal with those first. So I'd like to move those, and I think we have a seconder, Councillor Dennison, already. So we can put those to the vote. Okay. All right, we can separate recommendation 2. So we'll just do 1 and 3. Yep. And that has been carried, all in favour. So we will now move to recommendation number 2, which I'm happy to move, and I think Councillor Dennison has seconded. So we'll now put that to the vote. And that has been carried 10 for and 1 against. So now we have 2 additional recommendations that we will deal with, and we will deal with separately, but I'd like to ask officers if they have any comments or perspectives that they would like to share in relation to these recommendations for elected members for the committee.
That's me, through the chair. Understand elected members' views around particularly recommendation number 4. we'll just arrange for our comms team just to connect in with elected members around. Perhaps we'll draft up a list of key achievements first and then circulate those around for review and any perhaps inclusion of any additional ones or ones that they might have concerns about. Happy to do that. Relation to recommendations 5A through to C, I do have delegation to make minor adjustments to the annual report. Anyway, happy for you to move these if you choose to do so, but it's just whether or not other elected members might have other ones they're wanting to add as well, or whether or not you're going to trust me to make the adjustments that you need, that you'd like to see done. I'll leave that in your hands, elected members. Happy days.
So thank you. So now we'll throw this open to any further comment on item 4 and from those who have not spoken. So we'll go now to Councillor Hancock. So I just get you on.
Yeah, Mr. Chair, I just really want to speak to 5A, if I may.
Can we do 4 first, Councillor?
I don't
Come
want to
back
speak
into
to
the
it,
queue.
thanks.
Thank you. Councillor Barrett.
Thanks. I'll treat this as right or reply unless there's anybody else in there, but I think recommendation 5 makes perfectly the case for recommendation 4. And I well accept and acknowledge the risks pointed out by Councillor Johnson around this becoming a spin factory rather than a factual accountability document. And would just point out that the language around engage does leave the pen still firmly in the Chief Executive's hand, and acknowledging that, you know, recommendation 5 is a clear demonstration that ultimately it is still subject to influence around this table. So hopefully this will be a better process in future and encourage you all to support. Thank you.
So we'll now put this recommendation 4 as presented on the screen to the vote. And that has been carried, all in favour. So we will now move to the 5th recommendation, and I'd like to throw this open for comment from any councillors who haven't had the opportunity. And Councillor Hancock, your turn.
Yeah, thanks, Mr. Chair. I just want to speak specifically to the removing the reference of Featherston Street. I won't support that, so I'd ask that that be separated out if it remains in there. The reality is that Featherston Street has also attracted support from the community, and I'm sure that you've all received some emails from various members of the community saying thank you very much for the work that you've actually done. It also, by removing that, it actually undermines and minimises, I think, the efforts of staff in what was quite a significant project. And that project was actually provided with a recognition for certainly the public consultation aspect of that particular project. That project represents significant change which will always attract criticism from members of the public at times, but it also represents progress, and ultimately it represents the safety of the many students that use Featherston Street. So by taking that out, I think you're actually starting to get into getting into the weeds, and you're actually undermining what was, I think, a very significant project in the city. One which required a huge amount of work from our staff, and we all went through some difficulties with some of the kickback on that. But overall, it has been also welcomed by members of the public. Thank you.
Councillor Johnson.
I'm also not going to support 5A for the reasons that Councillor Hancock has outlined. But I do think it's a very good example of what I was trying to refer to before, which is elected members with an axe to grind about a particular issue, taking this opportunity to remove reference to a project that they didn't like. So, yeah, I think I'll leave it there.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Meehan.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Seeing Featherston Street's getting so much information, and I'm hearing people talking about the positives that they've received from it. We all know we've received some negatives. I just happened to be a couple of days ago in Boys High School, running an event there, and heard quite clearly from the principal how much revenue they're losing now because they can't park a bus out front, and they've got nowhere to let 10-year-old kids off that use their spare centre. They've been told they can park around the corner, but when it's pouring with rain, to march 30 or 40 10-year-olds across the crossings and across the rain becomes effective. So those schools have sort of ventured off to go elsewhere rather than go there. So they've actually lost quite a lot of revenue out of it. So to hear that we've heard and hear a number of times about how much the schools support and love it and everything else, I believe the Mayor had a conversation the other day with a couple of schools down there, and they're not overly supportive of it. So I will be supporting 5A. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Dennison.
Thank you, Chair. I haven't been a fan of the separated cycleway down Featherston Street, but I would agree with what Councillor Johnson's saying here. It's not to say that this wasn't a supported program through a majority of councillors heading through, and it's actually been delivered, and I would say that it still fits part of the intention of why whoever thought about it in the first place to support it was hoping to achieve. And so I don't want to get into the political influences of the retrospect of is this a popular project or not. The fact that it's been achieved, it's been delivered, supposedly on budget, and it's what we set up to do. I would probably sit with the position on that I would also oppose this to keep reference of it because it was a key project in the roading budgets. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Arnott.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. It's going to be interesting to see what comes back to council next month with the results of the survey, and I think it will be pretty negative, to be honest. I certainly support removing it. You know, a lot of businesses have moved, closed, and I don't think there's too many positives. And it's such a small section of road. I can't ever see it growing, to be honest. So I certainly support removing it, and for no other reason that, I think it's early days, and I think it will be negative. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Zavalin.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I too was at Boys High for a good hour a couple of weeks ago and heard a completely different story from the staff who were managing the crossings there. So I think the point to make there is it's highly, highly subjective based on what aspect of Featherston Street you are in and operating in, and also your personal views. So I think it's just really, really hard to go, people love it, people hate it. I think people are engaging with it as and where they are, and they all have different opinions, and that's just as true out there as it is in this room, as it is at Boys High among the teaching staff and the students. It's a bit hard to make sweeping statements, but I do think in this case, we're damned if we do and we're damned if we don't, really. If we put it in, I think we do run the risk of being tone deaf and people saying, how's that an achievement? It's actually been, a big furore. But on the other hand, if we don't put it in, people go, oh, council trying to hide it. Trying to minimise damage. So I think it's immaterial whether it's in there or it's not in there. I think there are a lot of people who are vested in this now and will comment whether it's in or not. Also, I do feel if Boys High are losing revenue from people not going to the Spears Centre, but there's also no other theatre avenue in Palmerston North or the area which has a 400-seat auditorium, so I don't know where they're going. Anyway, I'm thankful to Councillor Wood for putting these up. I'll have a think about 5A.
Okay. Councillor Wood, you're the last person in the queue, right of reply.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Firstly, appreciate that B&C aren't particularly controversial and hope that get across the line. I think it's just useful to highlight some really key achievements of council, and I don't think being close to signing a contract is a good one, nor is another council's bus system, so hopefully they'll be supported. On the Featherston Street one, for the councillors that opposed it, it does us no harm for it being included as a key achievement. I mean, you can put that in there, a key achievement, if you want. It does nothing but aggravate and infuriate the community more, which for councillors that didn't support it, I guess is a positive. I'm more looking at this in a case of, do we need to unnecessarily antagonise the community by, when we know it is certainly at the very least a highly controversial issue, either you support it or don't, I just don't think it's conducive to good public relations when we see trust in councillors falling and when we know that it's an issue that has significantly varying opinions in the community, to highlight it as one of our key achievements. So we've already got 3 key achievements in there in terms of valuing staff. We already talk about 3.9 kilometres of footpaths being replaced, 2,559 potholes being done, upgrading bus shelters, the Confident Function Centres achievements. There's still lots of good stuff in here. I just think this particular issue, due to how politicised it is, we don't do ourselves any favours by keeping it in. By all means, councillors, if you want to, that's your choice, and that's the useful part about bringing this to a vote. And I anticipate in future, if there are highly contentious ones, they would still come to a vote here, which is perfectly fine. I think that's a good process. But for the less contentious ones, I think it's useful just to have that discussion in advance. But yeah, I just don't think that we're going to do ourselves any favours. So I hope you'll support all 3 of them, but at the very least, I hope you'll support B&C. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
So I think on that basis, we can now put this to the vote, and I think we'll put 5A to the vote first. So we'll now vote on 5A. That has been carried 6-4 with 1 abstention. So we can now move to put B and C to the vote, which we will do now. Carried 10-4 and 1 against. So thank you, councillors. That now concludes item 6 on the agenda, the adoption of the annual report. I believe we can now move to close our meeting with a karakia. So thank you, councillor. So thank you, councillor Zabelin.
All right, thank you. Ka mutu tātou, me enui tātou. Kia puta ki te whaiau, ki te ao marama, whakamaua kia tīna. Haumie, huie, tae ki e.
I'll now pass over to Councillor Johnson. Thank you all for your attendance and contribution today.